Hello, everyone, and welcome to the program Business Point on Global Television. I am Samuel Odi. Many thanks for joining at this. On today's edition of the program, we'll be assessing the second quarter GDP growth of Nigeria. And on a good note, we witnessed a significant growth of 3.19% year on year. Nigerian gross domestic product grew by 3.19% year on year in real terms in the second quarter of 2024. The growth rate is higher than the 2.51% recorded in the second quarter of 2023 and higher than the first quarter of 2024, growth of 2.98%. The performance of GDP in the second quarter of 2024 was driven mainly by the service sector, which recorded a growth of 3.79% and contributed 58.76% to the aggregate GDP. The agricultural sector grew by 1.41% from the growth of 1.50% recorded in the second quarter of 2023. The growth of the industry sector was at 3.53%, and improvement from minus 1.94% recorded in the second quarter of 2023. In terms of the shares of the GDP, the industry and service sector contributed more to the aggregate GDP in the second quarter of 2024 compared to the corresponding quarter of 2023. Looking at the statistics now and how much this GDP has grown from the previous GDP, we are witnessing significant growth from these major sectors. That's the key players of the growth we witnessed in the second quarter of 2024, despite having a backlog of a few sectors not, hitting its mark, but we witnessed a significant growth. But we are still going to be assessing the growth and pay more attention and look into the major sectors that contributed more to the GDP of Nigeria in the second quarter and what can be done to improve those other sectors that really didn't contributed to the expectation that was expected. So on today's edition of the program, I have a guest who will be joining me virtually, and we'll be going on a quick break. When I come back, we'll be introducing my guest at this time. Please do stay with us. Business Point on Global Television.
The business world can be dynamic and unpredictable, with headwinds and volatility sometimes becoming an obstacle for players in the business and economy landscape. Watch Business Point on Global Television as Samuel Odi walks you through the twists, turns and curves in bonds, stocks and crucial market indices from a global standpoint. Watch Business Point weekdays on Global Television at 11 a.m. West African time. Business Point. This is business.
Many thanks for staying with us. If you're just joining, this is Business Point on Global Television, and I am Samuel Odi. At this time, I'll be introducing my guest who is joining virtually, Mr. Eze Onyekwere. Good morning, sir. Good morning, Mr. Eze. Hello, Mr. Eze, can you hear me? While we're still waiting on Mr. Eze, looking at the GDP of Nigerian, the second quarter GDP growth of Nigerian economy, we're going to be focusing more in the agricultural sector where we witnessed a downtime from the previous year where we recorded 1.50% growth, and then in this second quarter of 2024, we're witnessing a little bit of downtime of 1.41% growth contributed to the GDP. So now there are angles, and then this is the raining season, and obviously the second quarter is within the raining season. Now we want to figure out what really went wrong, and since the agricultural sector is one of the key drivers of Nigerian economy with its 4 sub-activities make up of the agricultural sector, the crop production, livestock, forestry, and fishing rather. So those are the 4 major angles of the agricultural sector, and then they are one of the key drivers of the Nigerian GDP. So witnessing the downtime of growth from this sector is actually going to be alarming, given the fact that the country at large is suffering food crisis, and we having this downtime is actually going to be a challenge. So we're going to focus and draw more on this angle to figure out what can be done. Mr. Isaac, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now, sir. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
So, Mr. Eze, what is when you saw the second quarter GDP growth of 3.19%, what was your reaction to that, sir?
Well, we have to understand that that growth is just marginal, particularly if you understand the context and the background where we are coming from. The baseline we are coming from is so low, and we are talking about a population growth of about 3% per annum. And so if you look at the massive poverty, the stagflation, where we have a decelerating economic growth, very high inflation, and of course, massive unemployment, and the fact of the multidimensional poverty, which in 2022 was about 65% of the population. And that was because before the 2 critical measures about removal of fuel subsidy and flotation of the naira. So if we were to repeat that assessment today, we could possibly get 80 to 85% of the population living in multidimensional poverty. So we need to grow at least not less than 8% per annum for a sustained period of 10 years to be able to talk about lifting majority of Nigerians out of poverty, creating jobs to match the youthful population and the growing population, as well as sustainably making our currency to be a good store of value, and of course to boost our exports and external reserves. So the GDP is not just standing on its own. It's about our standard of living. It's about the value of our currency. It's also about the key macroeconomic indicators in the economy that tell us how well we are performing. So at 3.1% growth, there is nothing to cheer about.
Looking at this other angle now, what are the implications of Nigeria's GDP growth rate on its economy, development, and poverty reduction? Do you see this growth as an avenue to reduce or curb out poverty, given the fact that you were mentioning about the amount of Nigerians living in the multi-dimensional poverty?
Well, I want to take it sectorally for us to understand what is happening. We had an oil sector that used to contribute about 9 to 10% of the GDP, but currently doing less than 6%. And what are the critical challenges? Over the years, our production in terms of millions of barrels per day has become very low. Like in the last quarter, we were doing almost 1.22 million barrels per day, as against earlier periods, we used to do about 2 million or 2-point-something million barrels. So that's one part. And of course, we know the story of the massive industrial oil theft. We know the story of the mismanagement of that sector. So if we want our GDP from the oil and mining sector to grow, we must stop oil theft. we must stop the mismanagement of the sector. And for me, one of the key points of doing it is that the president should relinquish that Ministry of Petroleum Resources because he's too busy looking after security and all the other sectors of the economy. He should not just take the main ministerial position. He should relinquish that position to a more competent, capable, and honest Nigerian who will be transparently managing the sector, reporting to the National Assembly and to the people of Nigeria. That's number one. You look at the agricultural sector, it's doing about 23%, but that shows you that the sector can do more, considering insecurity that has stopped farmers from going to their farms to sow or to harvest, or to even add value in one way or the other. And also considering you are discussing 20-something%, and in a place like South Africa, agriculture is only doing 2.5% of their GDP. Yet, I looked at the figures. In 2022-23, South Africa exported over $11 billion worth of agricultural produce from just 2.5% of its GDP. And in our own case, where we are doing more than 20%, all our exports in that year was about 1.4 billion, roughly maybe less than 1/8 of what South Africa got from export of agricultural produce. I'm just putting that in context. And so, you know, our agriculture is still led by small-scale farmers, particularly women farmers. It's still rem-fed. It has not introduced mechanization and sufficient inputs to be able to increase the yield per hectare. So it's also an opportunity for us to take note of these binding constraints on agriculture and seek ways to remove them, especially, let's start from the insecurity pervading the land. The other sector, which is about manufacturing, where you have oil refining, pharmaceuticals, vehicle assembly, leather products, wood products, rubber, you name it, plastics. We did not also do well. We are still doing under 10% in that sector. Yes. In more polished and civilized and advanced economies, they are doing as much as 20-something to 30-something% contribution. And that tells you whether a country is developed or not. Well, in the cement sector of that subsector, we more or less achieve some level of self-sufficiency. And I believe that with the full operationalization of the Dangote refinery, we are also going to achieve some level of sufficiency in the refining of oil. What will happen if the federal government were to operationalize all their public refineries and bring them on stream or privatize them, let them start working? It will mean more value addition to the economy from the refining subsector of manufacturing. Another subsector there that has promises is the pharmaceutical angle of it, because you recall that the president had just enacted an executive order, which includes enhanced local manufacture of pharmaceuticals, the active ingredients, and medical goods, as well as services. So, in essence, we have an opportunity to improve the contribution of the medical and pharmaceutical sector to the GDP. And of course, we have the automobile manufacturing and assembly. And we know we have a number of upcoming industries there that we can actually encourage so that we also attain some level of self-sufficiency. So a lot could be done across the sectors. I've just taken you through agriculture, manufacturing, and then the oil sector, but there are also a lot of sectors where value can be added.
Yeah, yes, we are going to dwell more on agriculture for a bit before we move on, Mr. Eze. Looking at the previous, that's last year, the GDP contributed a little about 1.50% to from the agricultural sector. Now we're witnessing a little bit of downtime of 1.41% just for the second quarter. Looking at the current
growth, not the
food
contribution, just
security that we're facing now, insecurity that we're facing in the country now, how key is it going to be for the agricultural sector to, revamp and then put policies in place that will help bring out Nigeria out of this current dire stage of food insecurity?
I think what you were referring to about 1.41% is the growth of the agriculture sector, its contribution. But in contribution to the GDP is doing about 23% currently. Now, I think generally what can be done is that we've been talking a lot without acting. Of late, I know I heard the president talk about state police, devolution of powers to the states and the local governments to begin to contribute to securing their geographic area. So I believe that If that is done and more resources are made available to the states to fund the state police, it will be a step in the right direction. And we must begin to use, I don't want to use the word intelligence because it sounds so big. We must begin to use just common sense in our approach to security. The other day, we saw some terrorists from the core north burning armored personnel carriers, are taking over it. And I was saying, you don't require to be a security expert for you to know what to do. If that armored personnel carrier came there and spoiled, it was an opportunity to lay ambush, to lay siege, or even to bait those terrorists. When you allow them to come, you could deal with them with drones or with aircrafts. And you just allow them to be taking pictures and making mockery of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the armed forces. So these things don't require highfalutin in terms of intelligence. It's about the political will. Once the political will is there at the highest level, at the presidency, at the National Assembly, these insecurity challenges can disappear. And some people have even suggested that you could have the local vigilante and hunters, incorporate them as a special wing of the Civil Defense Corps, train them, equip them, and let them protect the territories in the communities where they live, so that these people will be met fire with fire, and they will retreat, and this thing will stop. So I believe that insecurity can be tackled. And if you tackle insecurity, then you begin to discuss about issues relating to climate change and how it affects agriculture, the flooding, the desertification, and what needs to be done in terms of agroecological practices that can help us to overcome these challenges, in terms of sustainable agriculture, in terms of removing more of the chemicals that pollute our soils over time, and begin to think of agriculture in a way and manner that introduces small-level, locally fabricated mechanization, especially for small-scale women farmers, and then you improve their productivity, and then we begin to discuss more about these value chains and put muscle behind that discussion in terms of what do we do to preserve the produce so that we stop the waste occasioned after every harvest area. How can we be adding value to these things to convert them to finished products, those raw agricultural products, so that their shelf life could be extended to 6 months, 1 year or more. Some of it could also be exported out of our country. So at the end of the day, it will be a win-win. More jobs will be created. We provide more raw materials for industries, export some, add value to others. So everybody will be much more happy if we focus more on agriculture as well as add value to the products emanating from them.
Well, notwithstanding, we're hoping that this current administration is actually doing everything possible to help curb out insecurity within the northern region. But still, we are going to talk about a little bit of the oil sector and its production. We witness around 1.6 million barrels production a day. So how is it key now that the oil sector needs to get involved with the current practice, and then the President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, how would they all come together to be able to curb down this current fuel hike in terms of helping products from the rural communities coming into the urban cities so as to curb out the hike in food prices?
Well, let's not mistake, confuse the oil sector with the transport and storage sector. What you're discussing about the food being transported from the rural to the urban area is about the transport sector. The petroleum sector is different, and that's why I said that the president needs to hands off the Ministry of Petroleum and give it to a more competent, honest, and transparent, accountable Nigerian who will stop massive oil theft, who will actually report on what exactly is produced and take steps to enhance our capacity to produce more. So instead of doing 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million barrels a day, we can afford to do 2.5 million barrels a day. And that will increase the quantum of foreign currencies that we can gain if we sell the crude oil. Of course, that person must also tackle the wholesale corruption in the sector. We are told today that Nigeria produces a barrel of crude oil at $48 per barrel. So the implication is that during the time we are selling at $80, all that is left available for us to deal with is 32. 80 minus 48 is 32. From that 32, the federal government could possibly take 60 and the oil majors take 40. So we are discussing from that 32, the government will take only about 19 to 20. And that 19 to 20 is what will be shared across the three tiers of government, federal, state, and local government. And of course, when it is shared, some people also position themselves to corruptly steal from the money. So in essence, what Nigerians are gaining out of that $80 per barrel could possibly be not more than $10, $12 per barrel, because if you factor in corruption, not much gets done. So in essence, the oil sector needs a whole roots branch approach to reform. And we can't continue behaving like people who don't understand the nature of development. We can't continue with the idea of commercial oil, calling some foreigners to bring technology and sharing 60-40 with them. No, things should not be done that way. Alternatively, the NNPC should be reorganized to be a company that can dig up oil from the high seas, from everywhere. All it needs to do is to employ both Nigerians and foreigners with the technical competency. If we have only 100 engineers who can do it, and we need 300 engineers, for heaven's sake, we can go to Europe, we can go to America, we can go to Japan, China, Asia, hire them, double their salaries, and bring them to Nigeria. So when the oil is extracted, and whatever we need to do to it, the whole produce belongs to Nigeria. So the cost of paying those foreign technical workers that will come and do will not be more than 5% of the cost of production, not to talk of negotiating to give away 30-40% of our oil to some foreigner simply because he claims he has technology. So there's so much to be done, and that's why I'm saying the president does not understand the sector. He should hands off. He can't afford to be the minister. He's too busy doing other things, so he should hands off that sector and let a more competent person who is also transparent and honest come to deal with the sector.
Mr. President, now he has actually been on the road, having meetings with the president of China, and as well in Taiwan, also having a meeting. And we are all hoping and certain that all of these meetings is going to boil down to the fact of the growth and development of Nigeria. But notwithstanding, how does the government's economic policies now impact the Nigerians' GDP growth, and what can be changed so as not to be seeing these ups and downs in terms of our monthly, our quarterly GDP growth?
Now, let's get back to the oil sector. What can be done is that we have 4 refineries that are idle. There have been promises. You know, the last time the NNPC managing director told us latest by August, and we are almost in the middle of September. What has happened? So let them account for the money. This government policy. You spend taxpayers' money claiming to rehabilitate refineries. Account for the monies. Let the refineries work. 440-something million barrels, 1,000 barrels a day will add much more with the Dangote to improvement in the GDP from the oil sector, from the manufacturing, oil manufacturing and processing sector. So if you cannot operationalize them, privatize them, concession them transparently to, investors who have the managerial capacity, the technical capacity, and the financial capacity to turn them around and run them for the benefit of Nigerians. That's one. We've talked about improving security as one of those policies that will help us improve in agriculture. When you come to other sectors, like real estate, the telecom sector, which is contributing a lot, you also have to rejig your policies. All those inhibitions, unnecessary levies, right of way that are inhibiting the growth of the telecom sector, that is not allowing the investors to put down the money to improve the services available to Nigerians, all these things need to stop. We can also target, like we talked about, the automobile industry. We can tell ourselves that in the next 5 years, virtually all the cars driven in Nigeria, about 60 to 70% of them, should be manufactured or assembled in Nigeria. We can introduce policies which makes the local assembly lines or the manufacturing lines much more competitive, and set targets to them and nudge them to improve the capacities of the vehicles that are manufacturing or assembling locally, and as well as patronize them, especially through public procurement. And by the time we do this consistently for 4 or 5 years, also we can provide auto loans, cheap single-digit loans provided by the government, so that as they are producing, civil servants, people can take all these auto loans and take those cars, and then there will be greater demand. So instead of making 60,000 cars a year, they can make 1 million cars, improve their capacity, create more jobs, pay more tax to the government, so it becomes a win-win scenario. So everything in terms of the GDP or economic growth or creation of jobs rises and falls on government policy, how correct that policy is to the environment, and how well it is implemented if it's a good policy.
All right, Mr. Eze, thank you so much. So this is how much time will permit us to take on to this edition of the program. So we really do appreciate your input. Thank you so much for making our time to join us on the program today, sir.
My pleasure.
Yes. Tackling insecurity and having the oil sector producing more than just 1.2 million barrels per day to around 2 million barrels per day would help improve Nigerians' domestic GDP rate. So we're hoping to see the Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Science and Tech, including every other sectors that contributes to Nigerians' GDP, put heads and all hands getting on deck to be able to see to the growth of this economy. My name is Samuel Odi. That's how much time will permit us to take on to this edition of the program. Bye for now.